All right, so let's get into chapter 14. Chapter 14 has to do with styles of delivery. Listen, delivery is critically important to your speech. Poor delivery kills good ideas. Having something important to say is only half the battle. The other half is saying it in such a way that people will listen and remember what you're saying. You have to be able to convey your message effectively and with sincerity. Good delivery is absolutely necessary to the success of your speech. Now, there are several delivery methods that are discussed in chapter 14, and these methods are the different ways that you can deliver a speech, and they depend on the nature of the speaking occasion, the purpose that you're speaking for, and your own strengths and abilities. You may be better suited to one of these methods than you are to another, and the majority of these methods are acceptable for any kind of speaking environment. The last one we'll talk about it is very specific to a certain kind of setting, but the majority of these you can adapt, you can blend. My own personal speaking style is a mix between two of these, but let's talk about these different methods of delivery. The first is speaking from memory. This is a way that it was done in ancient times. This is known as oratory, and it requires skill and practice. It requires skill to memorize large scripts and practice to deliver them effectively. But speaking from memory can be a powerful thing. However, the stress of the speaking environment can cause the speaker to lose track of where he is in his memory, draw a blank in the middle of the speech. And if you don't have any kind of notes in front of you and you're operating strictly from memory, when you draw a blank, all of a sudden, everything flies out the window and you find yourself sitting up there going, and those are the things that you say whenever you don't know what to say next. And so memory is powerful. Speaking from memory is powerful, but you have to be aware it has its limitations. Also, it can be difficult if you're speaking from memory. If you make a mistake or you do something, you accidentally skip to the wrong place, it can be difficult to get back on track. Once a mistake has been made, once you have lost your place in your mind mentally with where you are in this speech, it can be difficult to get things back on track. However, sometimes memory can be very effective. It makes it easier to establish eye contact. It makes it easier to use gestures to enhance your speech. However, if you're concentrating too much on what you've memorized and not enough on delivering your speech, then it can make you appear stiff and unnatural and mechanical rather than friendly and relaxed. You're looking for a conversational tone in your speeches. So if you're giving a relatively short speech and you can pretty well memorize what it is you want to say, and you have that level of comfort that you can adjust on the fly, then memory may be the way to approach it. It gives you more freedom. You spend less time looking down at your notes and reading that's always very obvious. I pointed out in your first speech where it was a little too obvious. You were relying very heavily on notes, maybe on a manuscript. And so memory helps you be able to seem and appear more natural if you're not caught up in concentrating on remembering what you're saying so much so that you lose that natural aspect. Another method of delivery that's quite popular is the manuscript method. And what that is where you write out a manuscript in full and you deliver it pretty much word for word. You don't commit it to memory. You write out everything that you envision yourself saying, and then you deliver the speech from that manuscript. Now, this isn't as easy as it may seem. Manuscript delivery requires practice because you have to avoid the temptation of just sitting there and reading directly from the script. And you have to work on sounding natural, on sounding conversational, not just sounding like you're reading a prepared statement. Manuscript delivery is not for everyone. Some do it well, some do it very poorly. I can name preachers that if I named them, you'd know who they were, who are very well-known speakers, who are well-regarded, well-respected, that preach from a manuscript, but they have the skill set developed to be able to do that. They're not just sitting up there reading their notes to you or reading the manuscript to you. They're able to read ahead. They're able to know where they're going. They're taking cues from their manuscript, and they're able to make eye contact. And they're able to they walk away from the pulpit and walk away from the manuscript and come back to it without having to stop and go, now where was I? What page was I on? That doesn't work. And so it's something that requires practice, practice, practice. If you're going to try to speak from a manuscript, you need to add delivery cues to the manuscript to help you keep you on track. For instance, just reading from a paragraph of type is much more difficult than reading from a hierarchical bullet-pointed manuscript. You may write out every word, but then break it into a hierarchy where you have a thought and sub-thoughts and all the way down to the end of that thought, and then the next thought starts, so that if you and it's all bullet pointed, so that if you lose your place or you get carried away or in a moment of inspiration you step away from the manuscript, when you come back, it's easy to find where you are and to begin to speak again from the next point. So you need to put these delivery assistants into your manuscript. If you choose to speak from a manuscript, you need to make sure that the font is easy to read, make sure it's big enough to see, and you should rehearse it until you become familiar with the manuscript. You need to know what you're going to say. You need to know, a manuscript requires you don't have to memorize it, but you need to be very aware of what's in the manuscript, or else you won't be able to maintain eye contact with the audience. You'll be too busy reading the manuscript because you'll be afraid that you may lose your place in your notes. So a manuscript delivery to be done well, to incorporate gestures and eye contact, you have to be familiar with what's in the manuscript. A third version or method of delivery is impromptu speaking. Impromptu is what happens when you speak without much, if any, prior notice. You have to speak on the fly, and you only have your knowledge and your own experience to rely on. You don't have any notes, you don't have any forethought, you don't have a manuscript, you're just speaking off the cuff. This is the kind of speaking that requires quick thinking. It requires you to be able to effectively organize your thoughts and be able to develop the outline in your mind as you're proceeding into your speech. It requires composure, organization, focus, and the ability to relate the topic to the audience without rambling. Listen, impromptu speaking can be powerful, but it can also be disastrous. Sometimes when you don't think through and you don't have notes and you don't have something to guide you, you find yourself just wandering around using up your time. I've seen that in some of your speeches, and I've pointed it out. You're just kind of rambling around. You don't really have a design. Listen, impromptu speaking is not a good method for a speech class. You need to find a better way to deliver your speech. Work from memory, work from a manuscript, or do the extemporaneous speaking that we're going to talk about next. That's the next method of delivery. Extemporaneous is whenever a speech is prepared and practiced in advance. It's not written out word for word. It's not a manuscript, and it's not memorized, but you're working from an outline. It is extemporaneous. That type of speech requires an outline that will jog your memory, help you remember. You may have full sentences. You may have several points, and you've got them laid out. And when you look at the point, you remember what you're supposed to say next. And there's a whole block of the speech that is kind of in your mind. And when you look down at your notes and you see the point, and then you're automatically, that feeds that information into your mind, and you begin to speak almost off the cuff with something you've practiced and you've developed. And it's not being created on the spot. It's something that you've thought out before. You didn't necessarily memorize exactly what you were going to say, and you certainly didn't write it down in a manuscript, but you have a good idea of what you're supposed to say when you get to that point in the speech. It requires an outline. It requires a good outline. That kind of speech allows a speaker to be more conversational, to be more natural, and to adjust to the feedback that you get from the audience. And that's a very important thing. Sometimes you're making a point and it's not being received. And sometimes as a preacher, I can see when folks aren't getting what I'm saying. And so I have to stop and elaborate a little bit more. Think of another example and help add some depth to it until the light bulbs start coming on. That an extemporaneous speaking style allows you that liberty. This is the method that is preferred by public speaking teachers. This is the method that is preferred by experienced speakers. This is the method we're trying to teach you in this class. Now, I will tell you, my own personal approach to preaching in particular is a blend between extemporaneous style and a hierarchical manuscript. I write out pretty extensive notes. I set them up in a hierarchical fashion so that I know how they flow, and then I allow myself the room to speak off the cuff, to deliver an extemporaneous delivery where I'm not bound to what is in my notes, but my notes are pretty extensive. And so if I feel led of the Holy Ghost, I can develop a topic further. If I feel led in the moment, I may follow after a thought that comes up while I'm working my way through my outline, but I can get back to it pretty quickly. And I, because of the way I've arranged it, it's easy for me to find my place and seamlessly move back into the flow of information the way that I planned it. And I have quite a bit more detail in my notes than you might have in your extemporaneous outline. So that's the speaking style that works for me. It seems to be more conversational, more natural, and more knowledgeable without giving the appearance that I'm just sitting here reading from my notes in boring monotone. So you want to work on whatever method fits for you. It may be a blend of these other methods. It may be that some memory and some manuscript and some extemporaneous, and some off the cuff. Whatever it is, you need to find a method that works for you, but it needs to be a method where you can deliver your thought in a conversational tone, where you can make eye contact with your audience, where you seem to be engaged with the audience, not where you just seem to be reading your notes. Does that make sense? The last mode of delivery, the fifth mode of delivery that we're going to talk about in this chapter, is sound bite speaking. Soundbite speaking is to public speaking what Twitter is to social media. It is not in any way the best approach for your speech assignments in this class. But there are some speaking situations that require this approach. Soundbite speaking is what you do when you speak from the conference floor at General Conference in the middle of a debate. You sum up your message in short but memorable statements, much like a preacher may go through his sermon and tweet specific points, specific statements that sum up. He may sum up his entire 45 minutes worth of preaching in one or two sentences, specific statements that sum it up. When you find yourself speaking about a subject on the general conference floor, you don't have very long. The chair may take the microphone any moment and give it to somebody else. You've got to be able to sum it up quickly, shortly, succinctly, and powerfully. The strength of soundbite speaking lies in a distilled approach that sums up a large topic in a brief but memorable way. You can't do this off the cuff. It takes some forethought. It takes some preparation. You'll consider a lot of different words and boil them down to just a few short, succinct statements. Used correctly and used in the right situation, it can be a powerful delivery method. Finally, the next section of the chapter that I'm not going to cover in depth in this video has to do with practicing your speech. There's a lot of good information there. It's very valuable. You need to read it just to understand this. Practice is absolutely critical to your success as a public speaker. Practice, practice, practice.